It's the big story this weekend. As the 2024 elections draw closer, the Independent Electoral Commission is embarking on its final voter registration drive. The process is unfolding against the backdrop of an ongoing debate about possible changes to the Electoral Act. So we asked this morning, is South Africa's electoral system ready for the upcoming polls? Well, Tselane is the executive chairperson at the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa and joins us now live via our video link for his insights. And Tselane, it's always great getting your take on these issues. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And, you know, it was a matter that made it all the way to the Constitutional Court, the debate around whether or not the Electoral Act is, in fact, written in a way that allows for democracy in action the way it was envisioned. And at the time of a decision needing to be made, there was a lot of discussion around whether or not Parliament has enough time, quite frankly, to get this right before the elections. It feels like we've reached some kind of middle compromise, and I wonder if you reckon this will hold until we get through this moment.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Of course, there's still quite a number of challenges. As you may be aware that yesterday Parliament had public hearings on the electoral amendment bill. So there are aspects related to the conduct of these elections that have not as yet been finalized. And hopefully Parliament will be able to finalize that as soon as possible. But of course, the bulk of the work has already been done. Even though there are weaknesses in what has already been done, the minister has indicated that there's going to be a committee or a panel that is going to be constituted in order to be able to look at the overhaul of the whole electoral system. But for now, minimum arrangements have been made to comply with the requirements of the Constitutional Court, and therefore we should be ready to have the elections within a constitutionally stipulated period.
The big objective, if you like, for the IEC during this time is, of course, voter education, right? Telling people about this Chapter 9 institution, why it's important to take part in this democratic process, and essentially what the outcomes may be given our laws. Has enough been done, do you reckon, to drive home the message around the kind of participation independent candidates are going to have this year? Because that's one of the huge distinctions from this poll from the last national election we had.
Yeah, I don't think enough has already been done in order to educate people about, firstly, the legal framework within which these elections will be taking place, but also to make it easier for even political parties to understand the impact of independence in the electoral landscape and then what's going to be happening. You know, so we understand that there's not been enough time to deal with all these issues. And as I've indicated, the fact that there are still debates taking place on finalization of the electoral framework clearly shows that there hasn't been enough time to be able to socialize the Electoral Act or the electoral framework to the general population and for the electorate to understand, you know, how things are supposed to be happening. But the basics are there, and the basics are what everybody knows. But in terms of the inclusion of the independence, which is a completely new thing, I don't think really a lot of work has really been done, or enough work has been done to educate the electorate.
Yeah, because I'm sure the ordinary person doesn't really have an understanding of what this actually means, even for what the ballot paper might look like, given the fact that for the first time we'll have independent candidates who are contesting. You know, in many people's minds, even as you speak of an independent candidate, there is this imagination that, for example, we'll be able to choose our own president. But that's not the case. I mean, even if an independent candidate gets enough votes to be in Parliament, it is still the National Assembly that's going to vote for the president.
You are correct. In terms of the Constitution, particularly Section 86 of the Constitution, only the National Assembly at its first sitting will elect a man or a woman amongst those who are gathered to become the president. So we don't have a direct presidential election. And if a person gets elected as an independent, that person will only be occupying one seat in the 200 seats that are available for independents, as well as candidates supported by political parties. And once this person gets into parliament, the majority of those who are seated in the National Assembly will then elect the person who's going to be the president from amongst those who are sitting there.
That being said, the IEC has come out to say that 27 million people's details have now been logged on the voters' roll. That's, according to the IEC, the highest number we've seen since 1994. And I suppose because of that, it's worth celebrating. The important thing, of course, is how many of those 27 million people actually rock up on the day of voting.
Absolutely. I think there are two issues here. Firstly, the fact that we've got now 27 million people registered is a significant step, but it's not sufficient given the number of people who are eligible to participate in the electoral process. You may be aware that we've got almost 42 million people who are eligible to participate in the process. And the fact that we only have 27 million still shows that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to motivate and incite people to be part of the process. But 27 million compared to the past is an important aspect. The second, it's an important step. The second aspect relates to the issue that we are raising now, that traditionally, even though you have so many people registered, it does not mean that all those people will be participating in the elections. In the last elections, I think, of the 26 million people who had registered, almost 2 million people did not participate in the election. So, yes, it is important for a person to be on the voters' roll, but we still have to do a lot of work to try to inspire those people who are registered to participate on the day of the elections.
You know, my next question may be premature, but you've overseen the running of a number of elections, so perhaps you might use that experience to guide us. Because of how unprecedented this moment is, I mean, we've spoken about amendments to the Electoral Act, the inclusion of independent candidates for the first time, what that means and does it mean in Parliament. Do you envision a situation where we'll run, or let me ask the question this way, are you worried that because of how unprecedented this is, we may run an election that's open to so much litigation at the end of it that, in fact, it brings into question, dare I say, the integrity of the election itself?
I think there is that risk. Even though challenging the outcome in the courts of certain aspects, if there are malfeasance that have actually happened in the election, is something that is accommodated in the legal framework. If you have so many complaints and litigation to the extent that people start doubting the integrity of the elections, that would obviously pose a very serious challenge and difficulty, not only for the Commission, but for the country as a whole.
All right, Dr. Tselane, it's always great getting your insights as mentioned. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Something tells me this is the first of many discussions you and I will have until the moment we have an outcome following the elections. Tselane is the Executive Chairperson with the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa.